The way we've approached these CDs and the reason we've numbered them and put this thing in the order we have is that for us to talk about remodeling, which is about taking something apart and putting it back together again, I felt it first very important to have a basic understanding of how buildings go together from start to finish. We've walked through this sixplex construction from start to finish. And now what I want to do is I want to transition to talk about remodeling, buying an existing home or building and improving it. How do we do it? Where do we do it? What areas do we spend our money? What areas aren't we concerned about? I'd like to throw at you some technical construction tips that will allow you to get where you're going in the most expeditious manner with the least cost to you. Remodeling starts always by defining the end objective. Just like new construction, you've got a set of plans and you're looking at it and this is what we want to build. Remodeling, you need to have a clear picture of the end, of what you're trying to do. So the pre-planning stage, although you may not have a full set of plans, you still need to have a very defined game plan of what you're doing so that you then can put the construction remodeling process in a logical order. Let me give you an example. If there are a whole host of things you're going to do to a house that you've bought to remodel, you're not going to have the carpet installers there day one before the painters. There's an order to construction. And in order to put the whole project in order, we've got to have a clear picture of what it is that we need to do. And then we put it in a logical construction order to get it done. All right? So what I'd like to do is I'd like to take a single family home. This is your average home that you're going to buy, you're going to remodel, and you're going to sell. I'm going to just talk about a home and all of the things and all of the decisions that may come up with a home and a project, kind of starting from the foundation level, working our way up, and then start talking about specific spaces and some ideas that I might give you on what to do and how to spend your money and what not to do and where to run and never look back. So here's this project. We've seen an opportunity and we are writing this deal up subject to an inspection. This inspection is a time frame where we're able to look at the project, evaluate the project. We may choose during that inspection to not just have our home inspector there. We may want to have with us a few of our key subcontractors, our plumber, our electrician, our all-in-one handyman guy, a roofer. We may want to have all four of those people with us during the inspection period so that we can get some really defined cost estimates of what may or may not need to be done on this home. And, of course, any other specialty contractors that we want to have with us. In other words, HVAC guys, drywallers, painters. In other words, when we first look at that home, we're going to say, I've got a rough idea of what I want to do with this. What I don't know is the cost to do all of these things. So during the full-blown inspection period, this is your window to bring in any and all subcontractors to walk through this home with you to start getting a real defined idea of cost. But let's kind of walk through this home together and make a few decisions. Remember, a buy and flip formula says that we're looking for a 30% of acquisition price net on this project. So we have got to work backwards from a projected sales price. We know that we're in the ballpark when we write this up subject to inspection. Let's not waste people's time. If this thing's worth $500,000 when it's all said and done and remodeled, we're not going to write up an offer for $450. Just because 30% of 450 takes us beyond 500. I mean, you see, so we've got to use some common sense. Don't waste people's time. It's got to be in the ballpark of possibility before we're even going to put this thing under contract. Once we've got it under contract, we're going to set it up with an inspection period and we're going to show up with all the appropriate people. And the first thing we do, we move down into the basement area of this home. And the first thing we notice is that the basement area of this home has a full ceiling height available. There's 8 feet from the slab to the bottom of the lowest beam down in the basement area. It's completely unfinished. We look around, we take some real careful analysis of, is this a dry basement? Okay? We look around to see what the dirt grade is on the outside of the basement. Is it right up to the top 8-foot mark, or is the grade more at about our waist level or 6-foot mark? We need to know that. How do we check that? Well, we can check that from the outside of the building. We can check it from the inside of the building. But we need to know what is the grade level outside, because if we plan on putting in a bedroom down in that basement, we're going to have to create a window. We're going to have to create an egress window. And if we have to dig out a well hole for that window, it's an entirely different process than if there's exposed foundation or even framing above grade. So what do we have going on down in the basement in terms of height and dryness? I'm going to make that evaluation very quickly. If I go down into the basement and I've got 5.5 feet and I'm ducking walking around, that isn't a basement. The question comes up, well, should I pick up the house and raise it? Answer, no. No is the answer. Could you? Of course you can. You can pick up a house, any amount of feet and build it up. But again, remember our remodeling flip criteria says that we need to be in and out from the day we own it to the day we no longer own it in no more than 120 days. And when we start jacking up homes and building them up to create ceiling height in the basement, we take on a project that is much longer in time frame. Now, if this were an Oz acquisition, and this was a home you bought for your own account and wanted to live there forevermore, hey, take the time, jack up the house, build up the walls, maybe pour a brand new foundation, maybe just frame it up, put in your full height basement, not on a buy and flip. So I like the fact that the home that we're looking at has a full height ceiling availability. It has the dryness that we're looking for. We've asked the owners, has there ever been any water down here? They've disclosed no, there hasn't. Dry as a bone. Beautiful. Okay. So I like that. The next thing I'm looking for in the basement is, do I have plumbing, drain line plumbing, that comes from the home up above, and does it come down and through the slab floor of the basement? In other words, if that drain plumbing comes down from above, comes down about 2 feet, and then exits out the side foundation of the home, I don't have drain plumbing at the floor level of that basement. The reason I want to make note of that is that if I want to put a bathroom down in the basement, I need the biggest component of that whole thing. Forget about water lines. I can get water lines anywhere. The drain line is the big question. So do I have some drain plumbing at the floor level? Some kind of drain plumbing at the floor level. Now, be careful. You may see a drain in the floor of the basement that is just intended to be a floor drain in case any water got in the basement. That may or may not be hooked up to the sewer line. It could just be hooked up to a footing drain and a French drain system that if water got there, it kind of carried it away from the house. I've seen people say, oh, I've got plumbing here, I can put in a toilet. And they go to this huge effort to hook up a toilet to a French drain system. Well, that lasts about 3 flushes of the toilet. So be very, very sure that what you're looking at is plumbing drain from above that comes down right through the floor. I like to see that. With that full height ceiling and plumbing coming through the floor, now I've got the ability to not only finish the basement, but I can finish another bathroom down here. Okay, so another thing that I look for. All right? Most of the time in an unfinished basement, I'm going to be able to get some clues down here about what the plumbing in the house looks like. So I'm down in this basement and I'm looking up to see water lines. Usually the main line is going to come in the basement level, the main shutoff, and then it's going to go from there to feed water to the house. I want to look at what those water lines look like. Not only the type of piping that's there, but my access to it. In an unfinished basement like this with full height ceiling, replacing that section of plumbing is no big deal at all. If this was a finished basement with everything sheetrocked or lath and plastered where I can't see the plumbing, it becomes a much bigger job at this point. So if I can, I'm going to get a look at the plumbing. Now, let's talk about plumbing very quickly. Let's say I've got this full unfinished basement and the house above me is one story. It's just a one-level home with a full unfinished basement. And I've got full height ceiling in a full basement. This basement goes the full perimeter of the home. And I know that I've just got one story above me. And so above me, I've got one bathroom. I've got a laundry facility maybe. I've got a kitchen facility. Completely replumbing the water lines of this home are absolutely no big deal. I can do that without even messing up the upstairs. Especially if I've decided that in that bathroom, I'm going to put in a new tub enclosure anyway. Now there's no big deal at all. Where plumbing gets to be pretty expensive in terms of running new water lines is when you have 2 stories of home with a bathroom on each floor. Now getting those water lines to the second story without carving the whole home up becomes a real challenge. More than likely, you're going to have to start carving out some walls to make chases for those water lines to get them up to the top story. Same thing with drain lines. If it's one story like this, replacing all of your plumbing drains, no big deal. Most of the time when we replumb a home completely, we don't attack or have any need to replumb the vent pipes that go up through the roof. Vent pipes are vent pipes. Where it becomes important that we have brand new drain piping is in the actual areas of the plumbing that carry water away. The vent pipe oftentimes can be left. We can use a rubber coupling and connect on to new ABS plumbing from old cast iron vent piping. Water lines, if they're galvanized lines, my suggestion is that we've got to do a full water line replacement. I've seen people try to take galvanized lines, undo them at a joint, unthread the joint, put on a lot of pipe dope and start from there with copper or plastic or PEX tubing. The answer is that at best that's a temporary fix. That those galvanized lines are getting weak. It's much easier just to take them all out and put in either new PEX tubing, new copper pipe, new plastic pipe, and do it all at once. Okay, we're still in the basement. Let's talk about how we can add some value to this home. If I have a foundation that is a full 8-foot concrete wall in the basement, for me to put in a bedroom is a much more expensive proposition with that full height concrete wall than if I had a 4-foot concrete wall and then 4 feet of actual wood framing. The reason is, as we talked before, that to put in a bedroom, I'm going to need to put in a window with the size requirements to meet egress code. If I have to cut that window into a foundation, in other words, cut concrete, header across the concrete, and put in a well outside that allows to crawl out the window and up to the surface, that's a much, much more time-consuming and expensive proposition than if I actually have framing above grade 3 or 4 feet from the outside. Then putting in a window is no big deal at all. Matter of fact, it's a day job. To cut the siding on the outside, throw in a header, frame out the window, set the window, boom, there's your window. So one day with a carpenter and the cost of a window, and you've got it handled. The other scenario where you're having to cut concrete, you've got a lot of excavation on the outside of the building to do to clear away. Then you've got to cut the well of concrete, and then header it, frame it, set the window, set this entire well system, it becomes very time-consuming and expensive to just put in a window. Bedrooms have to have windows. Minimum square footage of bedrooms, they have to have a closet, and they have to have an egress window. If I can put that window in quickly, framing a bedroom downstairs is very, very cheap. And from an appraisal standpoint, I've just created a new bedroom. I've taken many basements and put 2 bedrooms downstairs for $3,000 or $4,000 of framing and sheetrock and a couple windows. But from an appraisal standpoint, I've just created 2 new bedrooms. The value of the home just went up $50,000. That is the most inexpensive cost-value improvement you can make. Of course, I need a dry basement to work with. If I've got a wet basement on my hands, I need to hire a professional that all they do is excavate on the outside of that home, seal this basement, and give me a written guarantee. Don't try to seal a basement that leaks yourself. Just don't try it, because you're going to think you've solved the problem, and then you're going to spend a whole bunch of money inside framing and sheetrocking and carpeting and et cetera, and then all of a sudden that basement's going to leak, and everything you just did now is nullified. Hire a professional to handle a leaky basement. It's not a huge expense unless you really have got to go all the way around your foundation. Usually they can determine where the leak is coming from, excavate that area on the outside of your home, seal it from the inside and the outside. You might be spending $5,000 to $10,000 doing that, but still that's not a huge amount to spend given the free square footage now that you can improve in that home. Let's talk about heating systems. Most of the time in older homes that I buy that I'm going to remodel and clean up, the heating system is in the basement. The furnace system is in the basement. And there are some real ancient heating systems that take up a ton of room. Right? I call them spot. They look like a big octopus, right? That sits in the basement. So these are sometimes oil-driven furnaces. Sometimes way in the dark ages, they initially were coal-fed furnaces, then converted to oil furnaces. And sometimes that's what they're currently being used as, an oil-fired furnace. The size of these things sometimes takes up half the basement. And so one of the people that I will have with me on this walkthrough, this subject to inspection, will be an HVAC guy. And I'm going to want a price out of him on how to take this furnace, first of all, if possible, convert it to gas, if I've got gas on the street, and put a furnace in and consolidate the ductwork to get it up high and just get this in a much smaller space so it's not wasting my whole basement space with this antiquated big furnace. Now, sometimes these are relatively simple and other times they're not. So I'm going to get that number from this guy. A nice new furnace is a big selling point when you go to sell the home. And if it can be done for $3,000 to $5,000 to take out this old one and put in a nice new one with nice, tidy-looking ductwork, it's a big selling point because big, ugly octopus furnaces are very intimidating to first-time buyers in homes. And again, remember, I'm a Toyota dealer, not a Jaguar dealer. So I'm in a price range where a lot of the people buying my flip properties are first-time home buyers. And when they walk down there and see this antiquated monster system, all they see is something that intimidates the hell out of them versus a nice, clean, efficient new furnace. Simple, clean, they like that. Oftentimes worth the $3,000 to $5,000 to change that out. When you are switching a furnace like that used to be oil-driven, obviously now we've got to decommission the oil tank. And this is something, again, there's no way to do this yourself. You hire the professional, pump the oil out of the tank, fill it, give you a certificate of decommission, do it right, because you need to be able to hand that paperwork to your next buyer to say the oil tank has been professionally decommissioned, okay? In your inspection period, you're going to also make sure that that oil tank that's currently in there isn't leaking. And there's ways, very simple ways of checking that with a pressure test, where they're going to look at that oil tank underground and they're going to put some pressure on it to make sure that it's not leaking into the soil. If it's leaking into the soil, you are not going to be buying this home. Period. Done. End of story. There isn't enough money that's going to attract you to do that because you're going to spend it all back in the cleanup efforts of a leaky oil tank. A little asterisk here. If you own a rental property right now with an underground oil tank, you need to register your oil tank with PLIA, Pollution Liability Insurance Agency. If you register your oil tank with PLIA, you can get automatic insurance coverage at no cost to you, such that if your oil tank leaked, your PLIA insurance coverage will pay for the cleanup. Now, this is an insurance policy that is kind of like a master insurance policy that is provided by the oil suppliers that supply heating oil. So they've already bought the policy. All you need to do is register your oil tank with PLIA and put it on the homes that are currently serviced by oil that are now registered list. I actually had a home, a rental home, that was registered with PLIA where the oil tank failed and the oil went into the soil. And this was a $75,000 cleanup effort that was 100% paid for by PLIA because I registered the oil tank. That's a tip. And make sure that if you've got any rental property that has an underground oil tank, that it is registered with Pollution Liability Insurance Agency. Okay, back to this basement. I've determined it's dry. I've determined that I'm able to put a couple windows in very simply because I've got 4 or 5 feet of foundation and then I've got 3.5, 4 feet of framing above grade outside so I can pop a couple windows in very easily. I decide that what I'm going to do down here is I'm going to put in 2 bedrooms. And I'm going to, because my main drain line does go through the floor, I'm making a decision that I'm also going to put in a 3/4 bathroom down there, a shower and a toilet. So I've decided that I've got some free square footage to remodel down here. I've got a nice stairway that comes down already. I'm going to take out the big ugly furnace. I'm going to spend the money to put in a nice consolidated gas furnace. I'm going to put in a 3/4 bath and 2 bedrooms down here, and then just a little family sitting area. Those simple changes are going to hugely change the value of this home. My expectation of cost? Well, let's take a look at it. Let's start with the bathroom because plumbing is my first big concern. I'm going to have to provide some rough-in plumbing, and I determine I've got the ability to do that because this definitely is a sewer line that comes down through the floor. So I start my design based on where that plumbing is. I don't want to run, drain plumbing all the way to the other side of the basement. I'm going to make sure that my bathroom is located fairly close to where this drain plumbing comes through the slab. So I start my design work of this lower floor based on where that plumbing is and based on where my furnace is. My furnace is going to have to stay in its same relative place to hook into the existing ductwork. So I've got these 2 givens now to work with. And then I simply take out a piece of paper, I measure out the basement, I locate those plumbing stubs, and I start drawing a set of plans that creates a floor plan that keeps the furnace in its relative location and builds a 3/4 inch bathroom around and as close to where this main drain stack goes through the slab as possible. I draw up my set of plans. The second step is that I've now got to frame the outer walls of this basement. This is commonly known as furring these walls out. Okay? So furring, meaning F-I-R, using fir lumber to fur them out. Basically, I'm going to frame new walls in front of the concrete walls from the floor all the way up to the ceiling, and I'm going to frame those walls and create an airspace by virtue of the stud bay against the concrete walls. Now, before I start framing, it is just some cheap insurance to take some sealant product and seal the foundation wall all the way around. Now, there's a lot of different sealants that you can use, some clear-based sealants, some tar-based sealants. It really doesn't matter. A great concrete sealer all the way around the outside walls is just cheap insurance, okay? So I'm going to seal those walls first. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut in those windows for my bedrooms and get those out of the way and frame those windows out first. Then, if you're right-handed, you're going to work left to right, and I'm going to fur out these walls. Now, let me give you a couple little tips on furring. First of all, our lower framing plate has got to be a treated piece of lumber. If you're going to frame a 2x6 space, then it's a 2x6 laying flat of treated lumber. If you're going to do a 2x4, which is fine in furring walls out downstairs, again, a 2x4 laying flat, but treated lumber. Treated lumber has got to be on that lower plate because it's laying against concrete. All right? So we've got a treated lower plate. And we take that and we can set that down with just some glue, some construction adhesive. You can anchor that lower plate with some concrete bolts, but I'm going to tell you why I hesitate to do that. That anytime you start drilling holes in a slab, you create an opportunity for any hydraulic water that's underneath that slab to come up through the slab. There's no real need with construction adhesive, if those floor plates are cut tight, to have to drill that into the slab. And so I'm going to just use construction adhesive, put down that lower plate. I'm going to start in a left corner, okay? I'm going to level up from the bottom up to determine where my top plate is going to be. And I'm going to nail my top plate onto the bottom of my ceiling rafters all the way across. Then once I've got my lower plate and my top plate established, I'm going to start measuring studs starting left to right. Now, when you measure a stud in furring out a wall, get an accurate measurement and then add a 1/16 of an inch. Cut the stud there, because that way when you put it in, you put the bottom part on the lower plate, and as you push the stud in against the top plate, it's going to fit real tight. And you can tap it to get it nice and straight, and you secure your first stud in the left corner. If you're right-handed, you always start on the left corner. The next thing you do is you cut 14.5-inch blocks, 2 of them. You nail one to the lower plate, you nail one to the upper plate, and then your next stud comes in up against that lower and upper block, and that 14.5-inch block, of course, creates an exact 16 inches on center stud framing layout pattern. And you work left to right, always, because now you're swinging a hammer with your right hand, and you've got plenty of open room to your right, and all of your new framing is to your left. So you're not trying to swing a hammer inside of a stud bay. And this idea of toenailing your studs up into the plate, that's ridiculous. You've got blocking low and high to be able to flat nail each stud in, lower and upper. And then you cut your next set of blocks and you keep working left to right, all the way across. You can frame out a whole basement like this in one long day if you create a system. Set up a chop saw, cut your blocks, make accurate cuts on your studs, and work your way around all the outer walls first of the basement. Okay, once you've got outer walls to work with, then you're going to start snapping lines on the floor for your interior walls. Okay? We've got to have those lines snapped accurately of where our plates, our framing plates, are going to be on the floor for our interior walls. Those interior walls, of course, now have a place to start. They're coming into those outside walls. They have a place to start. So we snap all of our interior wall lines. Now, before we start framing interior walls, the next thing we do is we get in all of our drain plumbing. Okay? So our shower drain plumbing, our toilet drain plumbing, sink drain plumbing, anything where it's got to go in the floor, like your toilet and shower, has to go in next. And the reason we do this now, before we start framing walls, is we're going to have to saw cut the concrete, starting from where our main stack comes down into the floor, and we're going to have to saw cut pathways to be able to tie into that main line, which of course we're going to strategically make sure that that's inside a wall. When this is all said and done, that main stack coming down will be inside a wall, probably a 2x6 wall, because that main stack is probably a 4-inch or 5-inch cast iron stack. We're going to make sure that we start there and start running our plumbing in the floor. That's because it means saw cutting the concrete, tying into your plumbing. Your plumber's going to know exactly what to do, running the pipe, and then patching the concrete. Once that is done, now we can start framing our interior walls. The reason that those lines had to be snapped is that in order for your plumber to set the toilet drain, he's going to have to measure off of what will be a finished wall. And he's going to have to see where your framing's going to go. He's going to add for sheetrock. He's going to then be able to set that plumbing drain exactly away from that wall in the exact location it needs to be able to set a toilet. Okay, so those lines have to be snapped for him to measure where to put those plumbing drains. The same thing with your shower pan. Where are the walls going to be? And he's going to set that drain in accordance to where walls will be. Once that plumbing's in, then we frame the rest of our interior walls. Once our interior walls are framed, we finish our water line plumbing. We finish all of our drain and vent plumbing that goes up through the walls. And then we bring in the electrical work and we proceed just like any other construction job site, getting in our electrical, getting in our lighting, getting in our low voltage and our cable and our phone, and all of the things that we want to put in those walls happen next. And then we proceed just like any new construction project with, the insulation and the sheetrock and the tape and the texture and the paint. And here we go. We're finishing it out. What I'm anticipating spending on this 800-foot basement, I'm going to put in 1 bathroom, I'm going to put in 2 bedrooms and a family room, and I'm going to finish it out from start to finish. I should be able to completely finish this project downstairs under $30,000. Now, in the scheme of things, look what I've created for $30,000. 2 more bedrooms, a family room, and a 3/4 bathroom. I may also put in a laundry room down there if there wasn't one already. All of that for $30,000. The key is that I had the right bones to work with. I had full height to work with. I had a dry basement to work with. I had half framing so that my cutting in of those 2 windows for bedrooms was no big deal. Those were the key ingredients that made this reasonable. If I had to jack this house up or saw cut concrete or, completely dig up the outside to rerun sewer lines and all of these things, all of a sudden my costs are just ridiculous. So I'm looking for simple potentials, and in this case, that's a no-brainer. If I went down and this basement was already, quote, finished, and it was just so tacky, it had to all be gutted, I still would look at this project if it had those main ingredients. But in my inspection contingency, I'm going to need to look at where is the foundation height around this wall. Is there any sign of water? In other words, it makes my exploration a little bit more tricky because I've now got to kind of pull things apart to take a look at them to see what I've got to work with. The problem with remodeling is that when you're opening up a space that's finished, it's never a good surprise. So the ideal condition is with an unfinished basement where you can see everything you've got to work with. When you can't see what you have to work with, you have got to start building in some worst case scenarios. When I pull this wall apart, if the whole half framing is rotted and has to be replaced. Have I factored that in, right? If I pull all these walls apart and I'm thinking it's going to be great plumbing and it isn't, have I figured that, right? When I pull these walls apart and, and I'm finding that, there's termites just chewing the whole place apart, have I factored that? What people don't do is factor in the unknown. And so I always factor in a worst case scenario. When I can't see what's there, I'm going to assume the worst and start penciling it, assuming the worst. Okay? So in our scenario, we could see everything. That's the most beautiful scenario. And then we can just make some real intelligent value decisions. What we just did for $30,000 with 2 bedrooms, a family room, and another bathroom just created at least $90,000 of value to that home, at least in Seattle. So you're going to know what kind of value that will add in your town. I know that that's money I would spend here because a simple criteria, again, is money spent, just like the buy and flip criteria. I want to make sure that the money that I'm spending has the ability to at least triple itself. If I'm spending 30, I want to make my 30 back plus 60. In other words, I want to take that 30 and times it by 3 and have a 90 figure to get back my 30 and make 60 more. Make 2/3 on top of what I spent. In every project that I make, I have to value engineer it that way. If I'm going to spend $10,000 on a kitchen, am I increasing the value of that home by $30,000 by doing it? There's no point in spending $10,000 on a kitchen to increase the value by $10,000. That's not a good return on investment because you've got to factor your time and effort, right? I want to take a 10 and turn it into a 30. I want to take a 30 and turn it into a 90 so that I can pay my invested dollar back and have 2 times what I've spent left over. I hope that makes sense. Okay, let's talk about stairs. We've got to get out of this basement and go upstairs now. And I want to tell you that stairs in older homes were very, very steep, and the actual tread width sometimes very, very narrow. Understand that your market for this home is going to be a young couple, sometimes a young family. And moms especially, having little kids go down steep stairs freaks them out. I want to look at this basement, and if I've got a real steep stairs, is there a way I can reframe that stair system to bring it down where I can create some nice wide treads and bring it down into the room more reasonably than that nice drop-off? In other words, what I've got to end up doing sometimes is increasing the length of the stairwell. In other words, if I approach a stairway and I see the wall in front of me, and of course the stairs dropping off below me, what I need to be able to change the pitch of that stairway is I need more room in front of me on the main floor. So I'm going to really check this out and look at what are my options in the stair world if I have something really steep. Stairs are a bit tricky. They're not for the brand new rookie carpenter. Cutting stairs, once you've learned it and once you've done it, it's not a big deal, but you definitely have to know what you're doing to create a nice set of stairs that come out even from top to bottom. Stairs that turn, that paddle in a corner and turn 90 degrees or reverse themselves and come all the way back around 180 degrees are even more tricky. So on your list of subs, if you're going to have to deal with stairs, you're going to need to hire a really expert carpenter that knows how to cut stairs. It's amazing to me if you grabbed a net and threw it around 100 carpenters on a job site. You see a great big apartment project, let's say under construction, and you see 100 carpenters everywhere with belts on and skill saws in their hands. I promise you, if you threw a net around all 100 of them, there are 5 of them in that group, 5% that can cut stairs. It takes mathematics, it takes precision, and there are guys that have been carpenters for 25 years that don't cut stairs. So understand it's a special guy. It's a real interview question with a carpenter. How do you do with stairs? How do you do cutting stair jacks? It really defines their level of expertise, okay? But I'm going to check this out because really steep stairs with very limited tread widths are really a hazard. And again, it's a limiting your market situation. Anything that's hazardous, people go, ooh, I don't know about this, okay? So we're working our way up now out of this basement. And we've taken some time, of course, downstairs to do some things that benefit the upper floor. Of course, we're not going to finish this basement out until we've stubbed our plumbing up out of the basement to replumb everything upstairs, because we've determined that this home, we're going to spend some money on the kitchen and the bathroom. We're going to pull the carpets in the home, and we've already checked out that underneath those carpets are beautiful hardwood floors. First, want to attack the kitchen and the bathroom. Those are items that we're going to gut. Now, this is an older home, and so there's lath and plaster on the walls. In other words, this home isn't surfaced with sheetrock. It's lath and plaster. Let me tell you a couple things about lath and plaster. Trying to patch lath and plaster is just about impossible. Trying to tie in to lath and plaster. In other words, to say, okay, I'm going to just gut these walls, but leave these the same. Tying new walls into old lath and plaster is also very difficult. And it starts with the knowledge of how lath and plaster walls are put together. Again, how they're put together makes it very understandable why it's difficult to take it apart, at least in part. Lath and plaster, we start with our studs on the walls. Then a piece of wood lath about 1.5 inches wide is nailed to those studs, leaving about 1/4 to 3/8 inch gap between each row of lath. The entire wall and ceiling now has lath, wood lath, nailed on it with little 1/4 to 3/8 inch gaps between each row of lath. That's how it's installed. Then, in all of the corners, on the ceiling corners, the wall corners, every corner, meshing is installed. You get a very heavy gauge wire meshing that then is installed in all those corners and nailed to the lath. That's the preparation. All the corners now have meshing. And then, on top of all that, here comes the plaster. A real sand-based mortar-type plaster. And it is troweled on the walls, starting high and working their way down. Okay? The gaps in between the lath allow the plaster to kind of soak in between the rows and actually keeps the plaster from just kind of sliding down the wall. It's almost like creating a little ladder. The plaster can soak in between those rows of lath. It gives it some grip substance to hold the wall. And they are simply able to trowel on the plaster on top of the lath, come into the corners, which of course are all prepped with wire mesh, carrying themselves across the whole corner. So as they come into the corner, that corner is just plastered over. The wire mesh helps hold the plaster through the corner, and the whole thing is troweled top to bottom. Then here comes a second finish coat on top of that. Then, sometimes a third coat and an application of a rolled paper product, rolled vertically, not horizontally. So almost like wallpaper, a paper has gotten wet, and while the plaster is still wet, they start with the ceiling and then roll the paper all the way down. They roll it across the ceiling and then down the wall, and across the ceiling and down the wall, troweling it into the wet plaster, and that's the finished product. And then prime and paint from there. Undoing this mess can't be done in part. When you start tearing off some of it, when you know how it's put together, you realize I'm going to have to tear it all off. Because the lath, of course, is going across, staggering itself between studs. You just can't take a section of this wall off. Impossible. You try to cut it off, believe me, you will end up tearing the whole room out. So the remodeling tip is this, that when you attack a room that's lath and plaster, be prepared to take that entire room down to the original studs. And it's a mess. It's just plain hard work. And you start pulling off the plaster, start ripping off the lath. It is the messiest, nastiest job you'll ever do in your life, but it can't be done in part. All right? So we realize that when we go into our kitchen, when we go into our bathroom, we are going to be gutting those things to the studs. So we're prepared. Now, we've determined that if we are going to spend $15,000 on a kitchen and a bathroom, or $20,000 combined on a kitchen and a bathroom, we know that we want to create a situation where the whole house now is increasing in value such that we get our 20 back and we make 40. We have to make that determination. Is this going to raise the value of the home at least that much? If not, we may choose to do a very cosmetic cleanup, paint, etc. But we've determined that it will do that, so we're going to gut the kitchens and the bathrooms, and we're prepared that when we start pulling off plaster, we're committed to the whole room. Okay, so we first move into this old kitchen. We take out all the appliances. We pull out all the cabinetry, right? We take out all of the walls. We're being careful to not bust the windows because when you start pulling this stuff off, things start flying. You may take some plywood and put over the windows, screw them over the glass to just protect your glass during the demolition. And we take this thing from the ceiling right down to the floor. And as it piles up, we're hauling it away. There's no point in pulling off and creating a 5-foot mound of stuff in the middle of your kitchen floor. Try to pull it off, put it in a garbage can, and haul it out to your dumpster as you go. Keep a reasonably clean job site, especially when you start pulling off this lath off of the studs. You're going to have nails everywhere. Just pull it, fill it, and get it out of there. Pull it, fill it, get it out of there as you go. Keep a nice, clean job site. And get this thing right down to nice, clean studs. At that point, I like to get out a shop vacuum once I've pulled all the nails out of the studs, and I start vacuuming the stud base. I'm going to pull out any nasty insulation that's already in there. Sometimes there isn't any insulation in lath and plaster walls, but I'm going to vacuum out the stud base. Get all of the crap out of there. All these little particles fall to the bottom of the stud bay. Clean it all out with a shop vac. Give yourself a nice, clean, new surface to work, okay? Now we've got a job site. We've got a nice empty room. We've in advance drawn up a set of plans. We've already laid out our kitchen design. We've already ordered our cabinets. They're on their way. So now we identify our plumbing and our electrical, and we start bringing in our plumber and our electrician to start getting all of our components in the wall in the right place. If we're bringing in gas to service a new gas range, we get our gas people in to get that line going. But understand that in this situation, we've talked about the basement. I'm going to be doing all of these things in tandem in reality. My kitchen is being gutted. My bathroom's being gutted. Everything's going on in the basement. So when I get a plumber there, I get him there one time. When I get an electrician there, he's there once. A gas guy is there once. Okay? I'm simply, for the purposes of this CD, kind of taking it room by room and talking about the process. But in actuality, all demolition happens first. Get a nice clean site to work with, and then start putting it back together. Okay? So we bring in our plumber, we bring in our electrician, and we start filling this thing up in this kitchen. Here comes our new gas lines, our new phone lines, our new electrical lines where we want. We've determined that we've got to have a few outlets up in our backsplash on our counter of this small new kitchen. I want you to think this out. How tall is the backsplash going to be on your countertop? And make sure that that outlet is centered in that particular backsplash that you have. It absolutely cracks me up how many kitchens you go into, and it just shows of rookie remodeling when all of a sudden here's a backsplash that goes across your countertop and an outlet is half above the backsplash and half below. So how do you trim that? How do you put a cover plate on that? I just look at that and go, oh, it's your first remodel, huh? That's what it says to me. It just screams, this is the first job I have ever done. Make sure that when we're laying things out, that we're thinking about the finished product. That outlet needs to be horizontally centered exactly in the middle of that backsplash with the GFI circuit, a ground fault indicator circuit, because of its proximity to the sink. These are some things that I really look for, okay? Dishwasher is to the right of the sink. Nice solid sinks. Nice solid countertops, all very designer. It's right out of Crate and Barrel. It's what everybody wants to see. And you're putting this thing back together not because of your taste, but because of what survey says. All right? Same thing with the bathroom. We move in there. Now, are we going to keep the original tub? Probably not. But if you do keep the original tub, and it's in good shape, before you start demolishing this bathroom, you need to take some tape and tape off the drain, and then you need to take some cardboard and mask off this tub completely to protect it. Because when you start pulling off tile off the wall and lath and plaster, one piece of tile falling on that tub just made the decision for you. It's going to chip it, gouge it, and all of a sudden your expenses just went up. Demolition can go bad for you. Demolition has to be a very controlled science. You know, people throwing things and pulling things and taking the big sledgehammer. That sounds fun, but sometimes you make more work. Remember, on the other side of this bathroom wall is a bedroom that you're not intending to do anything to. And if you get a little too wild with the sledgehammer and you put it through the bathroom wall and it carries through into the next room, that little dent you just put in the bedroom, remember, that's a lath and plaster bedroom. Now you're going to be gutting the bedroom because you just got a little wild with the sledgehammer. So take it easy. Take it slow. There's a tool out there that every remodeling guy absolutely needs to own. It is the tool. You need to go out and buy yourself a really high-quality Sawzall. A Sawzall is a reciprocating saw. You hold it like you would hold a torpedo gun, and it has metal blades, it has wood blades, and it's a reciprocating saw. Sawzalls allow you to cut things out of place instead of just tug and pull and smash. And it allows you to do a reasonable job helping you with your demolition rather than making more of a mess than you're solving. When we see that this home we purchased has a window in the tub enclosure, or sometimes I've even seen them high in the shower enclosure, this is just a red flag that should help us anticipate problems underneath that window. 9 times out of 10, when we tear into that tub enclosure, we are going to find that the wall and the framing underneath that window that was in our tub enclosure is rotted. Where it gets to be a bigger deal is that now that you've taken out that window, you've got to patch the siding on the outside of the house. You're going to take out that window. We don't want a window in the bathroom. You're going to patch the inside, which is no problem because you're re-sheetrocking and concrete boarding that entire bathroom. The challenge comes is that now you've got to patch the siding on the outside, which if you were not planning on painting this home, now you're going to have to be painting the home to match this little patch of siding in. It's a perfect example of how one little change results in several decisions downstream being made for you. Just be aware of that. Whenever you see a window in a shower or a tub enclosure, chances are that the wall underneath that is rotted, okay? And it's going to lead to more work. All right, so we've gutted our kitchen and bathroom. We're going to start putting those back together. That's money well spent. We have decided that we're going to pull the carpets in this entire home. But do we want to do that right now? Think about this. The rest of the home, the 2 other bedrooms on the main floor, the living room, the dining room, they're all carpeted at this point. And our game plan is that we're simply going to clean up some wall prep in those rooms and then repaint all of those rooms. Okay? This old carpet serves as a nice drop cloth to protect our wood floors at this point. And so we're going to leave this down there while we mask off and paint out all of our walls, all of our ceilings and walls. We're going to leave that down there. Only when we've got a good coat of paint on the walls. Now, we're not going to paint our lower woodwork until we get rid of that carpet, but we're at least going to get all of our main wall spraying done with this carpet serving as a drop cloth. Then we're going to pull the carpet. We're carefully going to pull the tack strip. Here's another great example of how you can hire some $8 an hour laborer and tell him, hey, okay, pull the carpet and pull the tack strip, and he actually does more damage than he does good. Pulling tack strip without gouging and damaging the floor takes some real care. We don't want to go to the expense necessarily, unless we have to, of refinishing this floor. And if we're careful pulling tack strip, we can get away with it. Get a real nice wide flat bar and a hammer, and as you lay that flat bar down on the surface, make sure that it's not digging down into the flooring, that it's nice and level with the floor. And as you tap it under each of those nails and gently pull up, you might put a wood block underneath your flat bar to pull that wood block up. You can pull out all of that tack strip without messing up your floor. Then you can come back and actually patch the holes where those nails were holding the tack strip down. Come around, paint out all your base molding. Oftentimes you're going to have to install a 3/4 inch quarter round shoe along that molding because, of course, with the carpet kind of going against the older base, there might be a little gap of flooring there. So you may have to come around with a new piece of trim all the way around. That would be the last thing you do. Pre-paint that lower piece of trim, by the way. Pre-paint it, cut it, install it. Then all you have to do is touch up. Okay, so we've gone through this home. What have we done? We've bought a home that had a good roof. We've bought a home that had a good panel box. We haven't really done anything to the wiring in the main parts of the home, simply the wiring in the areas that we've gutted. All right? Not a big deal. Our panel box was down in the basement, and so, of course, all of our electrical work was done and rerun to the panel before we start closing it up. We've sealed our outer walls of the foundation before we started framing, and then, of course, everything is insulated before we sheetrock it. What we've spent on this whole project now is, start to finish, we've spent about $60,000. Okay? And working backwards, we would say this project is going to sell on the open market for $500,000. We can start working backwards then and saying, well, what could we pay for this? And did we achieve all of our goals? I'm going to start running those numbers backwards day one. Remember, we're not just doing this for our health. This isn't a hobby of ours that we just love remodeling. We're intending to make some money on this, okay? So we're spending money in the right places. We've identified kitchens and bathroom as being a real seller. We've added a new bathroom. We've put in 2 more bedrooms. So when we bought this home, it's 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. Now it's coming back on the market as 4 bedrooms, 1 3/4 bath with a new kitchen. Boy, that's a whole different product. But let's back this thing up. Could we have paid $300,000 for this home? Let's do the math, just for fun. If we paid $300,000, right? We've got some closing costs to buy it, right? We've got $60,000 in remodeling costs. Let's say we're up to $365,000 right now. We've got a 4-month project on our hands, so we've got interest on that. Let's add another $5,000 on just for interest for the project, okay? So we're up to $370,000 now. If we add our 30% margin, right, of our acquisition price, there's $90,000. Right? So we're up to $460,000. And of course, if we sell it for $500,000, we're going to have sales costs, right? So we look at that and go, well, gosh, that's, if we get a decent deal on the listing agent, the selling agent, maybe some excise tax, escrow, title, we're going to have, could be up to $40,000, $50,000 of selling costs. Well, there we are. I mean, we're right there. We're right there. That is a rough way to start this project. That in my inspection period, I'm walking through looking at what I've got to do, costing it out, determining that I've thought of everything and that I can do what I want to do for $60,000. Therefore, this house under contract at about $300,000 is a reasonable project. Now, let me ask you this. I've spent $60,000 in remodeling. And when I look at that, I would like to have created $180,000 of additional value in the home, minimum for my effort. It's worth $500,000. So it's kind of a double check to the flip criteria, right? In other words, I can do a lot of work, and if all I end up with is a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house, is it going to sell for $500,000? No. So it's kind of a double check to my 30% of acquisition price. One formula says, if I'm going to spend $300,000 in this home, I've got to see some way, shape, or form to make $90,000. The other says, if I'm going to spend $60,000, I need to know that I'm creating at least $120,000 of additional value plus my $60,000 back. So is there $180,000 that I can add on top of $300,000? It's another initial way to check myself going in. And if I said, gosh, I'm paying $300,000 and I add $180,000 on, oh my gosh, it's $480,000. Is this house even conceivably worth $480,000? Well, it sure as heck better be to meet the other criteria, you see? So it's kind of two initial ways. Now, here's the best scenario. Let's say I can go into a home and I realize that, gosh, this home doesn't need much. I can do a very cosmetic cleanup of the kitchen, a very cosmetic cleanup of the bathroom. It's already got a bathroom downstairs, and all I need to do is change some fixtures in it. I've got to paint this. I can do the whole remodel for $15,000. If I've spent $15,000, I look at it and go, gosh, I've got to see $45,000 there, pay my $15,000 back, and make $30,000 in that criteria. Okay? But here I've spent $300,000 for the house. The other criteria says I need to make $90,000, 30% of acquisition. Well, I'm going to always pencil this thing by the bigger number, right? To make sure that if I'm making my 30% of $300,000, well, heck, I know I'm going to make the other number in this case. But let's say in order to do the remodeling I want, I've got to spend $100,000. Well, all of a sudden, I need to make $300,000 of headway of value, pay back my $100,000 and make $200,000. Well, I paid $300,000. I add $300,000 to that. Can I sell this home for $600,000? No. Therefore, this isn't my project. So there's sort of two ways I look at it, but it all starts with having a very defined plan and getting very defined cost estimates. If you don't know remodeling well, you need to go in with those people who know their trades well to give you firm written bids from licensed, bonded, insured contractors. Your first few projects, you may just be hanging out on this project watching every move to learn, right? And talk to these subs. That's how we learn. What I'm trying to do is give you a few tips of what to look for, that if this has got a 5-foot basement in, the answer is no. Right? If this has got this, the answer is no. If these are the way the numbers pencil day one, the answer is no. Where do we continue to move and where do we not continue to move is all a function of time frame and cost.